Welcome to the Resilience Sucks podcast, brought to you by the Adaptability Movement. I'm Ben.
And I'm Dan.
And we're here to give you resources and tools to help you go from a state of surviving to thriving in life.
Resilience sucks the life out of you. And while it's a necessary skill, it's one that we don't want to spend too much time in or we run out of capacity. We're here to talk to you more about how to adapt and find the opportunity in change so you can really go about thriving in your own life.
Welcome to the Resilience Sucks podcast. In this episode, I've got Troy Flower from Wellbeing joining me. So Troy has got a very interesting story, as most people do, that we invite on. But Troy and I met through a mutual friend, Danny Lloyd, who we intend to get on here at some stage as well.
He'd be great.
And Danny invited me to come and join Troy down with his Wellbeing men's wellbeing group. So I've been out for a couple of walks now with that, which is terrific. A little bit challenging on my ankle, but very rewarding and some great conversations that come with it. So Troy and I hit it off, pretty quickly in terms of that alignment around well-being and you know what's available in terms of our human potential in the way we perform and interact with others. So Troy, I'm going to hand it over to you to give a little bit of background to our viewers and our listeners, and we'll roll on from there.
Thanks, mate. You know, it's great to be here, and it's really great to find people and organisations who are focusing on what I think is the really important stuff in life, which is, you know, we can't change too much of what happens around us. You know, that so much of our life is outside of our control, and it's really only comes down to our response to those events. Yeah. And so, you know, what we're both focusing on is trying to help men, for us, men in particular, help build those skills to adapt and to change and to be resilient or whatever it is around getting through some of the stuff that life throws at us. And, you know, there's a lot of shit out there. You know, there's a lot of, it's just, you know, if you use social media and look at your social media feed, it's just ridiculous the amount of crap that you can be exposed to in such a short period of time. Yeah. Even the news, like I don't watch the news anymore. It's just got to be the most depressing thing to watch. Yeah. And what can you do about any of that stuff? Yeah. Very
agreed.
little.
Yeah. So, as you know, many people know, I'm on social media. You might find me on LinkedIn or Telegram or something like that. But I recognise those same things as you, and have chosen not to participate in that sort of stuff because I don't feel like it feeds me. It's not nourishing, you know, me as a person or the energy that I would like to bring to the world. So, I think more and more people are starting to kind of recognise that in themselves, and then it's the challenge of, but all my friends and all my family's still on there, or there's so many different tentacles as to why you could be on there. Yeah. You're only just going to discover how rewarding it is and how much you can adapt and find other ways once you leave it behind. So I'm not here to preach to anyone, but it certainly worked well for me, and thankfully, my business partner Ben is operating our socials for us, and hopefully at some point we'll outsource that as well, because with a business there's a role for it until you start to develop your own channels like this, where you can communicate directly with people, which is terrific.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny though, because you look at communication and how that's changed. Now, I try to look at things a lot through this sort of evolutionary lens and say, well, for 200,000 years the Homo sapiens species has existed in its current form, and genetically we're very similar to that starting point 200,000 years ago. Our brain chemistry is almost identical. Our physiology almost identical. We've probably got a bit taller, but typically we're pretty much the same, and yet our communication seems to have changed quite significantly over time. And in the last sort of 20 years really, since when the iPhone came in on, 2006 or 2007, somewhere around that time period. And all of a sudden we thought, actually, we don't need to speak face to face anymore. We don't even need to meet with people. Yeah. We can share everything about ourselves in 1/250th of a second bytes. Yeah. We can take one photograph and that's going to communicate everything about us. We can share that through social media as broadly as possible and tell everybody what that 1/250th of a second. I worked as a photographer for a while, so I kind of, used to set your lens, your shutter speed, and that's what we capture at. We don't capture the day. We don't capture we don't even capture a full second anymore.
And in fact, we intervene on our own ability to bookmark that moment, which is something we talk about a lot. Like, if you've actually put a physical object in between you and the very moment that you want to experience, to artificially capture that, which, for what means, there'll be a time and a place for that. I'm terrible at taking photos. My wife probably wishes I was a little bit better, but I often think, like, I don't need a lot of actual physical snapshots. It's nice to have some, and it'd be great if it was other people taking them. But for me, I feel great about myself when I have that moment of presence to go, here we are. I'm catching myself in this moment. I'm sharing it with you right now. Like, here's one bookmark moment right now, and I'll come back to this later, and that'll be a source of kind of joy for me. The communication I agree with, because this is fundamental to what we do with the adaptability movement. I know it is for you with your Well team as well. And we talk about it as a hierarchy of communication, and we usually sort of visualize that with a pyramid, and it's kind of like the top being the pinnacle and where you want to be with it, and the bottom being sort of, the areas that kind of most people fall down to or never rise up from. And it's heavily influenced by social media and other forms of communication. And so we say, well, at the very top, the most effective, high impact stuff, that's face to face. It's always been that way, thousands of years, right? And so, if you want people to pick up on all the subtleties of the way you communicate beyond just what you're saying, how you're saying it, the non-verbal cues that come with that, the energy that someone can intuitively feel from a conversation, your passion, and you can't do that without being with someone. So we start there, and then we say, what's the closest you can get to that? And this should be a goal in any form of interaction with someone, in my opinion. This is why we communicate it. So we go, well, there's face-to-face, then there's a live video call, then there's a live voice call, then there's a recorded video call, then there's a recorded voice call, and then there's all the other stuff that fits in. It's like, well, I'm messaging you, I guess a written letter perhaps. We don't talk about those often because it seems like it's really faded from existence, unfortunately. It's something that's so powerful, especially in an intimate relationship. If you're willing to do that, you can get great kind of emotional connection from something like that. Text message, well, at least I'm going directly to you, without all the voyeuristic nature of everything else that goes on. If we're talking social media, well, it's probably a direct message. Again, you're not, it's pure. The intention is still somewhat pure in that it's not about other people seeing what it is and you sort of identifying as a good person. And then, the wall posts and the Snapchat messages and the, Instagram stuff. And look, I'm not trying to poo-poo on those things. Obviously, some people find those things really useful as a tool for business or brand and that kind of thing. But if you're talking about human connection, like I think those things are a barrier to that. And the lower you fall down that, the less likely your message or your communication is going to land. And that's what leads to disconnection. That's what leads to disagreements and misunderstandings. And if you're talking about like intimate relationships with like romantic with a partner, or close relationships with children and family, well, that's something I'm not willing to risk. I would much rather invest in that and feel that connection being something that I hold really close. Is that how much can I understand about someone? How much can I feel someone? And for us to share this space, to share this energy together. Yeah. It's funny though, because when things start to change in communication, then you guys talk a lot about adaptability, which I love. And unfortunately, in a communication sense, I see us actually having to adapt to something that's inferior. An example of that. So with it's kind of with my with one of my kids. I don't have such a great face-to-face talking relationship. It's almost a bit challenged. But when I get onto text, they'll communicate so much better via text. Okay. And so I kind of go, this is terrible. And so I try to initiate the face-to-face conversation, because absolutely that's my comfort zone. Yeah. But I get very little. Yeah. But if I ask the same question via text, they're much more comfortable to communicate. And I wonder if that's something that's happening today, particularly with people who use technology all the time. They're much less confronted Yeah, I
face to
agree.
face.
We've definitely experienced that, both schools and clubs in particular. But you even see it in workplaces with people, even in our generation, because it's become almost like a safety net. If they're already experiencing some anxiety, some self-doubt, rather than sort of reflect on that and kind of find ways to maybe move beyond it or to find strategies to work around it, it becomes a safer thing for them to not have to meet that, what they consider confrontation. And it's an odd thing, like, I meet people and either, them or other people describe them as, they're very non-confrontational. It's like, well, I'm not convinced that is a reason to not participate in dialogue. I guess this could be confrontation, like, because we're facing each other, right? What is confrontation? It's an interaction. And sometimes, yes, there will be a challenge in that, whether someone is posing a challenge to you or it just feels challenging. But I don't know, just for me, again, like, I can't attain that same connection with someone unless I'm with them or that we've, grown our capacity to communicate via those other means, which sounds like you have. And so for me, when you say we have to adapt, I think, there's probably two ways of looking at that. One is that we utilize what works for us to be able to achieve the outcome that we want, rather than just defaulting to the lowest common denominator because that's what everyone else is using. It's quite obvious to me that it's the first with you. And then you sort of start to ponder on the idea. It's like, okay, you've achieved that in a message. Where could there be perhaps more safety provided in a face-to-face interaction by creating an environment that is really safe for that person that wouldn't normally be comfortable with a regular interaction? They're questions that I ask myself, so I'm not telling you to do anything per se. Just we spoke off camera about the last 10 months I've been volunteering and investing in my personal growth, but also the way that I'll share that with the Southern Men's Gathering, a not-for-profit organisation, and they have a weekend away where we go through the hero's journey, and sort of that you come into the weekend with a question and a man telling a story around self-doubt, lack of purpose, questioning around your own self-worth and identity. And it's really nice. They use a lot of kind of sort of traditional ritualistic kind of things in terms of, sacred spaces and, using kind of things within the environment to make it feel like a really safe container where you can be open and be vulnerable and know that is a safe place to share and communicate. And then it goes on the dissension. It goes into the really dark and shadows, and the stories that are being told they're not about redemption. They're about sitting and with the trauma they experience and about sharing that emotion with people. So then you get to explore that relatability in the affinity groups afterwards. So you get like these support groups that you can then talk about what your response to that was and how you felt. And then there's a care team for anyone that's deeply traumatized by stuff. And you go through this, and then you start a small ascension on a Saturday evening with some different activities, and then on Sunday morning there's the story of kind of optimism and hope and adapting, which is obviously where I fit in, which will be wonderful. And it's great that there's more of this stuff around than just trying to demonstrate what is actually possible and what's available to people when you're willing to kind of look inward and to open yourself up to a little bit of feedback. As uncomfortable as it can be, my God, it can be rewarding. Yeah,
and it's funny, isn't it? I look at men. We look very much with a male lens with what we're trying to do and interact with people. And what we see on those walks on Saturday morning is something that I actually didn't expect, which is a group of people. Guys in particular, when they start walking, they're side by side.
Yeah.
And they're not looking at each other in the face. And for some reason, they seem to be able to share stuff a lot better in that context. Okay. The looking face to face for a lot of people is, perhaps it is that confronting nature.
Sure.
But when the guys go out walking, the first time I saw it, I was a bit taken aback. It was like excited puppies. Everyone was walking along and it was yep. And at the end of it, people's conversation was much deeper than what you get in a normal context.
Yeah.
And so I think, there's so much about different environments that can trigger different communication or can be more receptive to talking and not. And it's just trying to find that right environment that works for you, I think.
Yeah, yeah. And then you guys obviously go for coffee afterwards, or just a drink or whatever. And I know for me, that's the part I really look forward to. Because first of all, I'm not overcooking my ankle. I love walking, but I feel compelled to sort of not just keep up, but kind of almost be
hang out for the
front.
coffee at the end.
And yeah, exactly. And to get to that point where you're like, sweet, we had that experience together. We've shared some stuff. Now we can kind of explore some stuff a bit deeper, or be a bit more lighthearted about other stuff. And I think it's a fantastic environment that you're providing for people to explore that with each other. And it's certainly like, for people listening, or watching this, sometimes there's a perception around what men's wellbeing is, and I think this is part of the male persona that society has kind of pitched to us, in that, you can almost like assign emotions to a gender, or a sex as a male or a female's emotion. And what we notice is that anger tends to be a thing that is a male emotion, and it's somewhat condoned because it's a male thing, so we can understand that. Whereas when it's reflected by a female, it's almost frowned upon, and it's discouraged, and
it's a masculine versus feminine.
And we all have that masculine feminine balance, right? So acknowledging that in the first place, and where we sit on that spectrum, and sometimes we gravitate towards different ends of it in different situations. Like, you're probably not going to bring a lot of that caring, soothing kind of feminine energy. And I'm careful to sort of not stereotype here, but to talk about that balance. Like I said, we're not just talking about women, we're talking about that balance within us. To a competitive environment, you're going to bring a little bit more of that intensity, a little bit of that what's considered masculine. And then you start to question, well, what's masculine, what's feminine anyway? Okay, so you could go deep on this, but it's very interesting to me that you can bring any male into an environment with that, and you create like, by creating the right environment in the first place, it's disarming. And I think this is something that Ben and I have noticed when we've run events, whether that's with men, women, otherwise, or both together, is that when you have a willingness to be open, vulnerable, and kind of share yourself, it really disarms everyone else, because once they realise it's a safe place to do that, things just kind of slip out. They creep into conversation, and once they test that and they go, well, oh, it is safe. I haven't got that reaction that I thought I was going to get, or that I get somewhere else in a more triggering relationship. Possibilities are freaking endless. Like, it just all opens up, doesn't it? And both of us, I think, sitting here going, yeah, I know what you're about to say. Yeah, I can feel that too. And there's this vitality that fills us. Like, it's just, it's such a rewarding way to experience the world and to share with others. And
I think, it's one of the things we touching on well-being. The challenge with well-being, in certainly in my mind and my experience, is that it's feminine. Like, if you look at
perception, isn't it?
Absolutely.
If you look at
all the packaging, my wife gets Wellbeing magazine, and on the front cover, invariably, there is a picture of a 30-something woman or a 20-something woman in yoga pants on a beach with her hands across her chest, or in a pretzel pose, And as a guy, I look at those magazines, I think, that's actually not for me.
Yeah.
And if I look through it and I see pictures of guys, they're all clip art.
Yeah.
They're all I'm running on the beach and I've got a big smile on my face and I'm super trim, and the reality for most guys who could do with more well-being or being more well in their life is that they don't look like that, and they can't actually resonate with those characters at all. And so in some ways we need to rebadge, and I'm careful about using the word well-being, because I just think it's a woman's word. And I know that it's not, clearly, and that it's applied broader. But when we were building our website, we go into all the different image libraries and key in well-being. Oh shit! Yeah. What a load of crap! Everything looks the same. It's these highly stylized images, and if there's a guy doing well-being and you key in older man well-being, well, he's always got a ponytail.
Yeah.
He's always got grey hair, and he's always got loose-fitting pants. It's what a load of shit. Being well is what it's about. And there's many ways of being well. And And I kind of, again, look back on an evolutionary lens and say, what are the well-being drivers of men? And in many ways, one of the most important ones is fitness signaling. You know, we kind of, it's inherent in us that we and from an evolutionary perspective or a survival perspective, every one of our male parents has had sex. You know, it's pretty obvious. I mean, these days there's
1 + 1 = 2, right?
yeah. I mean, you know, there are different variations these days in families,
Yes.
and I don't discount that. But from that perspective, male and female have sex, and then offspring occur. And so in order for that to occur, two things must occur. You must find attraction, or you must partner up. And so inherent in all of us is this need to look more successful.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, I kind of look at the maleness of this, and these days, all of our marketing, everything that you see out there is that men are these gladiators, or they're hugely successful, or they have fancy cars, or they all of these images and status symbols of success are there. And as a male, to try and be well, we're trying to aspire to this stuff. And we push ourselves to do things that we wouldn't normally do because we don't enjoy them, they don't bring well-being, called a job, and a job that you hate.
Yeah.
But you do it because you want to get the latest car or the latest house. And so there's so much in society that is kind of forcing us, and I blame marketeers, and I've been one, you know, that are creating an illusion about what success and happiness is. And it's got nothing to do with well-being.
Yeah, it's moving you further away from achieving the very thing that you want. Like we go through school and we've got to get good grades to get into uni, to get a degree, to then go and get a job, to then take out a loan to buy a house, to get a partner, to then get married, to then have kids, and then what? And it's like by that point you realise that what you've signed yourself up to is ongoing debt for at least the next 30 years. Like an ongoing expectation around your role as a breadwinner, as a father. But where is that role as a father if every Monday morning you're getting up to go and leave to go to your job where you spend 80% of your work week away from your children? How is that serving you? And then where do you fit in fun and recreation? Where do you fit in family time? Where do you fit in connection with your wife? Like, I think society needs to be reimagined all over, and we do that. Like, we're not waiting for someone to tell us what that is, or for some marketer to condone it, or to suggest that this is where we're moving now. It's like, well, how do we create that? And it's not easy. And so therefore you need a support network. You need other people that understand and feel similar to you, and that they care about that connection and about a purpose outside of a career. Because in a lot of ways, like your job or your career it's there to serve the family. It's there to serve you in every other interaction in your life, so you have the freedom to do the things you want. Because as long as we have to go to that thing, we don't really have freedom. And this, we say we live in a free world, and yet, we're often working for someone else's profit and benefit. So, I guess, you understand this. We're both, entrepreneurs, and exploring our own business means about finding something which is meaningful and purposeful within our work, so that we can build more of those connections through that, but also then have the space, energy, love, compassion to take back to our family.
And I think there's, the notion of work and has some kind of, we have to call bullshit on some stuff here, because what happens in a workplace, and I've been one of these people who's never been particularly satisfied in any work environment, and as a consequence I've moved through a lot of work environments. So I think I've worked at about 19 or 20 different jobs now, and I became an 18-month specialist of stuff, and I'd give 100% of myself into those jobs, and perhaps part of my personality type. And at the end you would think there would be some reward. You would think that if you left that job, that in some ways you belong in that organisation, you give 100% of yourself, and you discount or compromise that time doing other things because you were 100% a great employer, you're 100% committed. You leave, and Troy who? Almost immediately. And
Troy's no longer in that role. You now need to go and see Darryl.
That's right. Hand your phone in, redirect your number. You disappear, and yet you give so much of yourself in that time to that work, and you believe in some sort of weird weird way that in fact you're leaving a legacy or something's going to live on. And I saw this. I did some work for a company looking at aging and that transition for people to retirement. And what really happens in that sort of traditional retirement transition is that people lose their identity completely. They actually lose all of their context. They lose their friendships, and they lose their sense of purpose because they're putting everything on work. And these days, we put it on work or we put it on financials, and all of a sudden you're sitting in there close to retirement and looking at your superannuation go down the shitter really quickly, and all of a sudden everything that was valuable to you, your work and your finances, are all going backwards.
Yeah, it's I've noticed this as well. Like because I actually really like connecting with older people, like in terms of like if
like me.
Thanks, mate. I'll take that as a compliment. It's not that different. However, yes.
You said older. You said older, not old. I reckon I'm older.
What I mean by that is people that have really experienced life. And sometimes that is, people around our age in our 4th and 5th decades, but other times it's people in their, 7th, 8th and 9th. Yeah. And the thing that I find fascinating about that is that, there's some cultures around this world that really adorn their elderly. They're the wisest part of their tribe kind of thing,
Status, yeah.
And I think we can discover so much just by talking to people face to face to understand the things that we haven't had the opportunity to live with them. Yeah. The things that they've been through, the way that their parents, the types of natural and holistic medicines and like herbs and different things that were used for healing before the establishment of conventional medicine. And to me, that's fascinating. Like I recall sitting down with an ex-partner's, pop, and I would chat to him longer than the other family would. And I think there was a real you can see someone come alive in that moment because their self-worth is being valued, and they understand that their life experience has meaning because someone else is seeking to learn from that. I think that's kind of cool. Like you talk about the ancient wisdom and I really love that as well. Like Ayurvedic medicine, the ancient Indian stuff is. I'm really enjoying it, like exploring that and utilising it in our own health journey. And traditional Chinese medicine has played a role along the way as well. And it's like how much of those foundational things that got us as a race, through so many kind of thousands of years in relatively good shape without chronic disease, like how much of that can we learn from?
And look, there's a classic case. I looked into this just recently. In 1984, 9 Aboriginal people walked out of the Great Sandy Desert, and they had not experienced white man. They'd not experienced any of the modernisation. So if you trace back sort of 40,000 years of Aboriginal inhabitation of what was Gondwana land there, now Australia, and so they hadn't changed at all in terms of all the modern luxuries. They walked out of there purposely because, in fact, one of their challenges was that because they were isolated, that they couldn't continue to grow because of the risks of inbreeding, and the Aboriginal marital system was really complex and sensational. And so so they walked out of the desert and they walked straight into sugar. They walked straight into refined products and that.
I thought you were going to go there. Yeah.
And their well-being changed dramatically.
So damaging. I've spent,
And we kind of look at ourselves. Sorry, I'm really passionate about
this.
Go.
We
kind of look upon ourselves as being really smart, but we're getting sucked in all the time. And the problem with society is that when you put all of your decision making based upon profit or financial security, then you discount humans, and you trace the...
It dehumanises the system, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like you spoke about superannuation before. People think, well, where does that superannuation sit? It sits in big companies, big globalist companies. So it's actually propping them up while small and medium business are suffering, that are your neighbours and your friends, and it's allowing them to do things which aren't actually in your local community's best interest, and probably aren't even in the greater community's best interest. Yeah. It's and people, we have this misconception. Again, it gets kind of sold to us. It gets delivered through the media, and that it's a family. What do they call it? Mum and dad investors is the one I've heard regularly before, and safe companies like Woolworths and Wesfarmers who own Coles, and talking about these solid investments, and you're like, most people don't even realise that, you know, a significant amount of both of those companies' profits come through either mining or gambling. Like, and you're like, well, how family orientated is that? How well is that serving us and our children into the future? Like, why wouldn't you shop local? Why wouldn't you go to local grocer, to local markets, to, you know, head out to a farm? Like, you know, get back in touch with source. Like, you know, you can't wait for someone else to say this is society's changing because of this. This whole top-down approach, like, hasn't really worked for us so well, right?
That's right. You know, and you look at the Pintupi Nine. You know, they walked out of the desert. They've been living in a desert.
Yeah.
A desert. You know, it's not like they were living next to Woolworths. You know, they lived out there. They were able to find things, and for 40,000 years, every one of their ancestors had survived in the desert.
Yeah.
And so they were able to survive with that. And these days, we can't go. We can't drive 5 kilometres without having to stop and buy some item full of shit from
coffee and a bag of chips
from an organisation that's applying crap to everybody. You know,
full of inflammation and ill health.
And that gets normalised. And I saw this poster, and I was going to take a photograph of it. I just stopped myself because I was walking and I just wanted some clarity. But there was a Powerade poster of a woman sitting meditating, and it had calmness, and it had friggin' Powerade.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know about you. I mean, I studied science, but there's not anything in Powerade apart from the fact that it might increase your likelihood of obesity and therefore reduce your likelihood of ever moving again in your life. But Powerade, calming, helping you meditate.
Yeah.
I mean,
and again, go back to source. Like, if you're
this
talking
shit
about
coming from?
rehydration, go
Water.
Water.
What the hell is wrong with water?
Good quality filtered spring water.
The Pintupi Nine didn't walk out and go, "Hey, has anybody got a Coke?" Because you know,
Yeah.
I'm really in need of survival here. You know.
Yeah. And if there's an elevated need for it, well, maybe consider some coconut water. I mean, it's certainly readily available to people in the tropics and sort of, you know, areas where they were encountering hot, humid conditions and dehydrating. And it feels like it's almost been inverted. Like, what is good is bad and what is bad is good. And it's sometimes difficult because it becomes this social pressure to conform to what is considered normal. Because if you step outside of that, you suddenly become alternative. You become, perhaps a conspiracy theorist. You know, you're something other than what is acceptable in society's eyes, and it's like, you know, it just feels so, like I said, inverted. Like, because why wouldn't we have the choice to choose what we nourish our bodies with, and how we then express ourselves emotionally, and who we share that with? And to me, it seems very anti-human almost.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's one of the challenges. You know, if we think about the dissemination of information, and we look at social media as an example, if we look at the news, we look at radio, television. Typically, most of the ways we get information out is by somebody having to pay for that. And if you look at where the profit lies within an economy, it tends to lie in products that are cheaply produced and sold through marketing. So that's where you get that great margin. If you look at products like soft drinks as an example, you know, sugar and water, put in a can and sold for $3. And so you can get that message out really broadly. It's like cold showers. You know, I look at cold showers and I love cold showers. It's just, well, when I say I love cold showers, I actually don't like cold showers, but I like what they do, and I like, for me, what they stand for as an ability to sort of endure something purposely that gives the body a hit. You can't sell cold showers.
Right.
The
stuff that is fundamental to well-being is so readily available to us.
You shouldn't have to sell water. You know, that shit's free.
You know,
so
it's interesting, isn't it? Because you talk about Coke and it's $3 a can, but you go try and buy water, you pay $5 for the same volume.
Yeah, because nobody wants you drinking water. The Coca-Cola company doesn't want you drinking water. Because if you drink Coke, you'll be wanting another one because your insulin levels, your glucose levels will go up, you'll spike down, and then you'll be wanting another one. And so then they'll sell you some other energy drink. So all of this stuff is triggered not in the interests of the consumer, but in the interests of the company selling to the consumer. And because they make profit, they can embed this stuff within our lives more easily.
Yeah. So we've started off covering
everything.
We have, haven't we? So I'm gonna try and tie a theme in here and sort of take us to something that you can use by the end of this. So we covered sort of that. I guess a lot around society and expectations, and particularly we've spoken about men in particular, but the balance between male, feminine. We talked about that investment in men's well-being and how readily available that is to everybody. Despite the fact that many men, when I've encountered this in men's wellbeing work, have been like, "Oh, it sounds really great, but it's not for me," before they've ever given it a chance. There's such a reticence, like nature, to engaging in it because of what it has been perceived to be. And then we've talked about some of the sources of where that messaging comes from and how that sort of identity or that social expectation is formed. What I'd love to sort of go into with you now, we talked about some stuff off camera about I guess the challenges you've had to come and the things you've had to adapt to and how that shaped where you are as a leader within this space now. So I'm going to throw over to you. We're going to change the energy quite a bit because some of this stuff is, it was a big deal for you and it's a big deal for anyone. And I might just sort of, in terms of like leading to the theme, you talked about your experience with bringing children into this world and starting a family with your wife.
And I haven't shared this publicly before, and for reason really to be a bit considerate of privacy of family. I think it's important to share a bit of it though, and that is that, for us, we when I married my wife, we were both a little bit older, or when she married me, maybe that's the way it went. We thought, let's get straight into a family. We had in our mind, let's go and buy the Toyota Land Cruiser because we are going to need a tribe here. We are after a big family. And so we went about that process of, as new couples do. We got married probably fairly quickly with a view that this was it. We wanted a family. We were very much in love and still are. But straight away, things didn't go our way in terms of the whole creation of the family thing. And being very rational, I was working at the time in actually the women's health space for a pharmaceutical company. So I knew my way. I was going to say I knew my way in and out of a vagina from a very anatomical perspective, because I would have conversations all day with doctors. Okay. So I was kind of able to rationalise a lot of the stuff that was happening, and able to sort of pull it apart and analyse it. And I guess we went through what was 7 years of IVF, and nothing kind of all the rational stuff that you can process in that situation doesn't prepare you for the emotional stuff that you experience. And I think as a guy, I'm sure it's no different for women, and I know it's no different, is that you carry these expectations on how things will be. And you just think, find the person that you care about. If you want to have kids, you have sex and then you have kids. It's pretty simple, time immemorial.
That's just the way it happens. It'll just, when we're ready, within a few months, we'll be on our path, and we'll be able to time that to a timeline to say, we'd love to have a baby in January.
Let's have a summer baby.
We breastfeed it, in warm weather and.
And I think for me, I've always had this real passion and interest around evolution and evolutionary behaviour and evolutionary psychology. Well, I kind of look and go for 200,000 years, my ancestors have all been able to succeed at this task. I'm not succeeding. In fact, I'm going to be the end of the line for my 200,000 years of ancestry before me. And each month in that process, you go through a period of expectation, optimism, and then crash. And 1 month and one episode was really challenging for us as a couple, and that's that my wife's mother had been diagnosed with leukemia. And we were in Queensland at the time, and she was in Victoria, and a superbly healthy woman, out of the blue diagnosed. And so we went down straight away. 2 weeks before that, or it might have been a bit longer, it might have been 6 weeks before that, we were on an IVF cycle, and I think a week or a few days before, I can't remember the exact timing, we'd had a positive pregnancy test.
Wow.
And so we had a positive pregnancy test. We had all of this joy. We were on top of the world.
Yeah.
We get a phone call on the way back. I still remember the call very clearly, in a car driving south of Brisbane, and saying her mother had leukemia. And so we got in as soon as we could, flew down to Melbourne. She was in the women's hospital in Melbourne, and so we went in, saw her, and obviously we were really positive, trying to help her through that experience, which was obviously incredibly confronting for her and her husband, John, my father-in-law, and Sonia and I said, let's go and get a scan next door.
Yeah.
So the Women's and Children's Hospital the Children's Hospital next door, and so we went in there and we thought, let's get a scan of the baby, and let's put it up on her wall,
Sure.
so that we can show her.
Yeah. That sort of hope.
This is his hope and optimism,
Yeah.
and so we went into the hospital, or into the sort of an outpatients area, and we said, look, we're at this time period, we'd like to get a scan for the child, and we were able to get that done. We went into the this was our first time, all of the lubrication on the belly and the ultrasound material, and the person behind the machine was saying, oh, there just doesn't seem to be anything here. Hang on, there's something. Not really sure.
Oh, feeling that with you.
And so then we went and had a more detailed scan done,
Yeah.
and the person was saying, you have an ectopic pregnancy, so the pregnancy that occurred outside the uterus and in one of the fallopian tubes.
Wow.
And they said, and it's potentially an emergency situation.
Yeah.
So that night we were booked in, and Sonia underwent emergency surgery to remove an ectopic pregnancy. So her mother was here in hospital.
Yeah.
We were in the hospital next door. And because of what her mother was going through, we swore to not tell her parents. And so, it was just such a confronting experience. And as a guy, I've never cried so hard just publicly in my life.
Yeah.
It was just so traumatic as that experience. And then,
Of course.
we kind of got through that.
Yeah.
And that's just getting through it. It was tough.
Yeah.
And then we found a way to tell Son's mum and dad, with the most positive spin on it. We've identified that was an issue. That's solved the problem. So now we can get on and keep going with the process. We'll be right. We'll be chipper. And poor Son, what she was experiencing and what we were both experiencing was pretty tough. And that was really early on in our IVF journey, and we went on to multiple ectopic pregnancies in that time period, and I think we transferred something like 35, or had something like 35 transfer cycles, which so each month you go in, and all of that stuff was incredibly hard. We lost her mum, sadly. 6 weeks later she passed away, and that was another very, very difficult time. And she was only 62 years of age, 63 I think. And then we lost her father 2 months after that. And so life changes and can change really quickly. And you can be sitting there, and her parents thankfully had cashed in their corporate chips, or not they'd run businesses, small businesses, and they were doing a lot of travel, which was fantastic for them. So they got to experience that because they were taken way too early, 65 years of age. And often we sit here and we project into the future and go, well, actually, I'll put it off until later.
Yeah.
Her parents were dead at
Yeah.
65, you know, and so so that kind of gives you a hell of a wake up call.
Yeah.
So each kind of each month we went through this cycle, and then you attach kind of honouring their life to IVF. Then and you're kind of going, this is. And,
That's loaded, isn't it?
Yeah, and so you just kind of build up all this hope and expectations around things that you know, largely in this case were really outside of our control. You know, we did everything that you can possibly think and research to do, and that in itself puts so much pressure on you to succeed.
Draining.
Which you know at the time is actually the opposite of what you need. You know, you need to be relaxed in this case, and you know, you just keep thinking that night a couple of people are going to go out and get pissed, and they're going to have sex in a garden bed somewhere, and the next day they're going to end up being pregnant, and yet you go through all of this effort, all of this focus, and at the end of it, there's nothing. And so it took us 7 years of that to close the door on IVF. I'd hate to know how many beach houses we paid for, and Mercedes Benzes. You know, we applied a lot of money in there over time, and you know, there's a whole industry that sits around all of that as well.
Yeah, we I actually didn't share this with you, but it took us 4 years to get pregnant with our first child as well, and I've shared a little bit with you about family and the joy that I get from that, and it's actually pretty phenomenal because we took in Kim's mum during that 4 years with dementia when she first got diagnosed, and there was challenges around that and all these different things that the thing that I've experienced myself, and thankfully while you're saying all this, I'm like, there's such relatability, and then I'm like, you know, it'd be great for Kim to talk about some of her story with this from a female's perspective as well. Absolutely. I wouldn't expect, you know, to invite Sonia, given I haven't met her yet, but there's so much that each partner goes through in an experience like that, and like you mentioned before about questioning your own vitality, virility kind of thing, and your contribution to that, and you've got all of your own kind of questions and self-doubt and expectations, and then you've got your partners that you're witnessing at the same time and trying to support each other. And you know, it's easy to go, you know, poor them, and that's terrible, and disassociate as if it's, well, that's someone else and it's not me. But I think, you know, I can sense in you the same way I've noticed it in my relationship with Kim, is that there's a worthwhile, like, that is above all of this trauma, above all of these challenges, that says that this is worth persevering for. And this is the importance of what we're trying to do with this podcast, right? It's about, yes, it's called Resilience Sucks. It's a play on words around, you know, if you're living in resilience, you're stuck in resilience, well, then it's sucking your life out of you. But it's what else is available. And we talked about the difference off camera about resilience versus perseverance, which seem quite similar. Like, people use the word interchangeably. And my understanding of this is that resilience is, let's say we're out in a storm, we'll give an analogy, and there's you know, different options and choices available to you, and one of them is to batten down the hatches, you know, hopefully find some shelter and just hope to get through, all right? And that, to me, that's resilience. Like, how long can you weather that onslaught, right? Perseverance is like, if I push on just this little bit further, I can get to where there is known shelter, where I'm more likely to be safe, and that's what I need to do, because there's a worthwhile in that, because it's providing genuine safety, it's providing opportunity to recuperate and then to persevere again. So to me, I see more value in perseverance than resilience. I think we need each of these, right? They're all tools within our kit. And then there's adaptability. And it's like, what else can you create out of this situation? What's available to you? What do you need? What tools can you draw on? And then where can you use that to lead you towards something? So to me, perseverance and adaptability, they continue towards something. Resilience is very much about, I think, stagnation, you know, and safety. Again, I don't want to rag on it. Like, it's a useful tool, but I know that I've spoken with people, I've shared, you know, that have shared stories with me and trauma, and I'm going to come back to yours in a minute. It's so valuable. I just want to probably give you a little bit of a break from that deep emotional stuff. Is that, you know, we actually use resilience as a compliment, and I don't think we actually realise what the impact of that is. Because if I was to say to you now, oh man, you guys are so resilient, like, I really admire that. What that says is you're so good at dealing with shit. right? It doesn't say that you're good at pivoting out of it. It doesn't actually recognise you for all of the other things that, you must be a phenomenal communicator with your partner and vice versa to be able to, work your way through this, to process those emotions, to be able to then reframe and to, work towards something else after having to kind of, reimagine what, the future looks like. Those things are so much more valuable to reinforce, and yet we go, really admire your resilience. Perseverance, yes. Adaptability, yes. Like communication, like compassion. I just think it's worth bringing up. And I want to jump back into what you're talking about now, and maybe you can, pivot off that a little bit in terms of your own experience, because I don't want to make assumptions about it. But
it's interesting, there's like in an IVF context, you're absolutely right. The perseverance is there towards the hope at the end. And for us, there were 4 different fertility specialists who we'd spoken to over that time, and each of them gave us a sense of hope and optimism. We would, after every egg collection, then they would put the boys and girls together in a petri dish, very romantic for them, and then they would bring back the results and say, yes, you've got X number of what we'll call blastocysts or hatching blastocysts. So these things, embryos had grown, and so we were always told, oh, these are super. I don't know whether they said that to everybody or not, but it always gave you that sense of hope. And the embryologist would say, oh, these are fantastic, and we'd see them up on a screen, and so you'd get that. You'd really invest in each one of these, like they were your baby that was about to go in. And then, at the end of the month, nothing would happen. You'd do a pregnancy test and it'd be negative. And that cycle just kept repeating and repeating and repeating. And it was only at the end that we spoke to a specialist here in Adelaide, and then we spoke to another specialist here in Adelaide, and they said, well, have you ever had any genetic testing done? Which we hadn't. And they said, oh, well, actually we had. So the boys had been analysed. So, it's another sort of part of that process that's really, really challenging as a man, is to go, well, actually, I'm going to have a baby with my wife by going into that room over there with that little plastic beaker and bringing it back, giving it to that nurse who's going to take it up to that room. All of a sudden, the whole notion of being masculine and the whole natural element of everything gets completely stripped away. But in the end, they did an analysis on what happened with each of those embryos, and they discovered that, in fact, there was some genetic abnormality that was occurring across almost all of them. And so we'd endured what would have been 6 years of IVF cycles. And in reality, had that been done early on, we may not have had to. So stupidity is repeating things. So I kind of look at that and think, were we resilient, or perhaps just forced into a bit of stupidity really over that period of time?
It's difficult, because I think it's easy to live in regret and to sort of turn that internally and beat yourself up for not having known. It's like in any moment, we only know what we know. We've only experienced what we've experienced. And one of the greatest, been lucky that people share some nuggets with me sometimes, or I extract them from our conversations because we tend to go a bit deeper. But one of the great things that someone shared with me was once is that you've never been more experienced than you are right now. And it's like, you've never been better prepared. And most people, when they hear that, like, oh yeah, I was, like last footy season or last year, I'd invested more in a mentor, or I'd invested more in training, or I was in peak physical condition. It's like, no, you're missing the point. You've never been more prepared than you are right now, because you have all of that now. You've got that plus where you've been since. You've got perspective, you've got wisdom, you've got lived knowledge, and we underestimate what that's worth. But it also provides great opportunity to reflect and to not feel the need to feel regret over something, because you're like, well, we did the best we could with what we knew in that moment. And for those that understand being sort of values based, or using your own values compass, it's like it's difficult to feel regret, because if you had that, you recognize what information you had available, and you're operating to your values, which you've identified within yourself, so you've used that to influence your decision making, what's left to regret? I did the best job I could with what I knew, and that was in line with the authenticity of who I am as a person. Personally, I've found that really helpful. I don't know if I sense that's something you've used along the way as well.
Yeah, and I think I've been fortunate in that my parents both instilled in me this they use the term "there's no such thing as can't," and I actually heard that repeated by somebody the other day, and I've never heard anybody else say it other than my parents. I thought they were completely
With
mad.
our children,
It's
can't do that, Dada. Honey, we don't use can't in
yeah,
this family.
it's kind of the Yoda.
How
No,
can you
try,
do this?
do or not do. You know, it's
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
I always reflect on that and think, right throughout that whole IVF process, we absolutely could,
Yeah.
and we could until we couldn't.
Yeah.
And we kept going until clearly the numbers stacked up against us and said, you can't do this.
Yeah.
And it's at that point that we had to switch tact, and we had, I think, about a month of going, okay, or maybe it was a couple of months really. It took us a little bit of time afterwards just to sort of take stock and process what the reality of that meant. And then we went, right, well, let's have a look into adoption and see where that journey takes us. So, it is that needing to adapt and that sense of there's always a possibility. So in everything you do, and it comes down to, did you do enough at the time?
Yeah.
And for me, that's always the answer. In fact, on the weekend, I was up at a mountain bike race up at Melrose, and I haven't been training enough for racing, and this was a pretty sort of challenging course. But what I was looking at on there was I had a heart rate monitor on, and when I was climbing up the hill, I was looking there, and I was at 100% of my heart rate. So I was sitting on 170, and my maximum heart rate for my age is supposed to be about 170, but it went up to 172, 173. Yeah. So I was sitting on that on this entire climb, and then at the top of the climb, I was going down, and I was going as fast as I could down.
Right.
And then I kept going up, but there were people going faster than me. They were going past me. I came 7th out of 8th.
Okay.
Out of 8. But at the end of it, I was really happy.
Yeah.
Because I actually couldn't have gone harder.
Yeah, great.
I gave in everything that I could, and at the end of the day, I think that to me was just so reflective of life, and any problem and anything that you're trying to solve is that, as you said before, you give everything with where you are with what you've got. It's one of my favourite sayings: do what you can where you are with what you've got, and if you only ever process under that lens and go, I'm here, I'll freaking do my best, and if that's not good enough, then you should be happy.
It's such a great anchor to bring yourself back to. And again, we get, society, it's that whole FOMO, that fear of missing out. And so, that's what then when we go, regret, disappointment, kind of, slipping into that victim mentality of why me, I'm different, everything, this always happens to me. And what I've noticed is when you do that, because I've lived that as well, like particularly when I was younger, before I learnt some of these lessons, was that you actually invite more of that in. Like you compound the problems rather than like acknowledging and reflecting and then pivoting forward to, using that to help shape your next exploration, your next journey, and being quite retrospective about that instead. And there is so much gold in what you're saying. I'm just sitting here processing and absorbing, and I was like, I want to add a little bit more value or context just to make sure that people are hearing it the way I'm hearing it. But I love your perspective. I love hearing that your parents did that, because I haven't heard a lot of people say that either, and yet that's something that we're trialing in our family, because it's like acknowledging that those things didn't help me, and so then how can I shape that differently for this new possibility in our daughters to be like, well, what is available to you? Well, let's think about like how else could you approach that? What else could you try?
But it's interesting though, because I process it, and we've got 2 teenage kids now that came through a different process than natural, and or we've got a fruit salad family, however you look at it, and I kind of think about that no such thing as can't, and in some ways it's empowering, but in another context it puts a lot of pressure on you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And so I kind of have to balance that, because my belief has always been there's nothing you can't do.
Yeah.
And unfortunately that creates the possibilities out here.
Yeah.
So anything becomes something that you can do.
Yeah.
And in some ways, I kind of think, you know, you have to close the door to some of those possibilities. And when I grew up,
but that to me that comes back to choice though. Like it's to
absolutely.
acknowledge that it's available, but it's also to take personal responsibility for you have a choice.
Yeah.
And you're entitled to that choice.
Yeah.
And if you choose to explore that or you choose not to explore that, that's fine. But that's okay. And that to me that's the difference, because it's not an obligation to explore all of it.
Agreed.
And therefore, because again, we externalize the choice. We say that, oh, I had to do this. I had to, like, you know, take that job, promotion, withdraw from that club. Often it's not the case. You might have felt compelled to because of circumstances that didn't align with your values or that didn't nourish you or make you feel good about yourself. But I think there's a combination there. Would you?
I agree. You know,
and it's all in context.
And I look upon it and think, you know, I'm really happy for what that instilled in me. I think there's certainly a lot more positive than negative in it. I do sometimes reflect upon people who perhaps say, I can't do that, I can't do that, I can't do that, and look at sometimes a bit enviously at their lives and think, actually, they seem a hell of a lot happier than I am, because every problem.
Is that because of their social media feed though? Or you see,
maybe
the curated moments of their life?
No, I just kind of look and think, sometimes, you know, we can make life more complex than what it needs to be. I was reading something on the global happiness surveys, and there was one done in Australia looking at happiness, and there was a correlation between happiness and levels of attained education.
Sure.
Which showed that the more educated you were, the less happy you were.
Yeah.
And
we think about expectations, and you know that, like, it kind of fits with that, doesn't it?
That's right.
Now there's more expectation. If you don't feel like you're living up to that, like, you know, and then you're shaped in that. Generally, with more education, you get told how it needs to be, how you need to do it. It's a constraint.
Yeah. So I think, you know, there's that interesting sort of interplay between the feeling that every problem is one to solve and you can solve it. And the ability to go, you know what, can't solve it.
Yeah.
But for me, you know, part of my personal mission statement is that I'm an awesome problem solver.
Yeah.
Which means that if you've got a problem here right now, I can solve it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what do I do about that?
Yeah.
And so then I have to make a choice. And like you said before, you know, you choose, I choose not to solve that problem. And that's taken me a long time, because anybody who comes up to me with a problem, I'm in.
It's a huge growth journey. I can relate to what you're saying there. You feel, I've pivoted myself from a problem. What was it? Solving the problem to being a solution finder. I try to go, you know what? It's less about the problem. It's more about, you know, where we're going to go to or what we're going to achieve out of it. But like you, one of my challenges for myself is working on to not insert myself into someone else's problem. If someone invites you to help them on that journey, and there's you know, that's something you feel, you know, that you'd like to do, but it would be easy to go around and be like, oh, I've learnt that lesson, or I experienced this, and you can't give someone the answer, and even if you try, it often doesn't work. But it's almost you're almost robbing them of opportunity to discover it for themselves. So, you know, one of the big things I mentioned, the men's work, Southern Men's Gathering, and there's a real commitment to, you know, at the beginning of any meeting or weekend away you do a sort of a check-in, and then you do a check-out at the end of it, sort of just to let people know where you are at the moment. So if there's been some traumas and whatever. And early on in that, you feel compelled to, oh, geez, I want to say something. I want to respond to that. Like, I want to offer them something. And you can do that, but you need to think about the context of it, and you're like, you know, ask, you know, what I heard was, you know, would you like any support with that? And often the man will say, no, I'm okay, thank you. Like, it was just to be able to share it, which was helpful. And that's been a great framer for the way you interact with others, because often when someone tells us their problems, we think that they want us to help, us to be the solution, especially if you consider yourself quite good at being someone that's very adaptable and very good at finding a solution to something. And yet it's often not. They just need that sense of moral kind of encouragement or support for them to explore it further, for them to get back on track, and particularly with kids, and I expect that you've seen this as well. Like, if you inserted yourself every time they had a challenge or there was a barrier to their growth, they'd never learn anything.
Oh, I'd be a lot grayer than I am at the moment as well.
If you sort of zoom out and you let them explore and let them fumble their way through it, but for them to know that you're there when they really need you, I found so much more value in that.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and I think kids bring in a whole nother lens on your life. And before we had kids, we spent a long time preparing for kids, and you build up those expectations about what you're going to be like as a parent. You know, when you got 7 years to prepare to be a parent, and the adoption process was another 5 years before our kids came into our life.
Yeah.
You build up an expectation of what you're going to be like as a parent as well. And I think this is another challenge that a lot of men experience, and women as well. Again, I tend to look more through a male lens because that's where I've got the experience. Yeah. And you kind of project yourself as being the perfect dad as well. So throughout life,
that's pressure.
That's right. And I think it's being a perfect parent is really hard. And these days I speak to.
But what is a perfect parent?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But as a male, you kind of, that traditional sense of you're a provider for the family. Well, but that role's changed a lot because in the past you're provider. I think about the Pintupi Nine and think, the male in that tribe had a couple of responsibilities, and that was providing food, or part of the food source for the family. Usually hunted the live game, helping to find water, and helping to provide protection, and teaching his son typically how to do the same stuff. Yeah. And you look at a role of a parent these days, it's very different. Yeah. And I even think, how do I educate my son around being a man? What does that even mean today? Because it's different. Yeah. It's different. I remember my father, the way that he educated me was quite different to what's socially acceptable these days to educate men. Yeah. And he wasn't doing anything wrong. In fact, he was I would say a much more progressive man back then than what a lot of his peers. Yeah. And I grew up with I think a very progressive family about the role that women played, but so many men had a very staunch view of a man. And today all of that stuff's challenged. I find when we have conversations with our kids, everything is a lot different. What do you do as a man? Well, you don't do anything different as a woman. Yeah. And I open my door for my wife because she really values it. She really appreciates that. Yeah. But what do I tell my son? Yeah. Well, so it's
interesting, isn't it?
So it's such a complex space,
because let's go back to some of the other stuff we're talking about sort of the you talked about the sorry, I can't remember the name of the tribe that you just mentioned. Pintupi, right? So there's a Pintupi. I know there's a lot of research that gets done on the Hadza tribe over in Africa because they're one of the most isolated, I guess, in terms of they haven't been influenced by modern day industrializations and those sort of things. They're trying to understand that, and then we look at Aboriginal cultures, and I've experienced this both through some time in the APY lands, but also coaching through SASTA programs and that kind of stuff, where at any moment during their sort of their puberty, like through their teen years, uncle might come along, knock on the door, and be like, hey, we're off. We're going bush for 3 weeks. That chance to induct someone into manhood, to take them through, show them the ropes, and again, we talked about like experiences, to not solve their problems for them, to actually almost provide an environment where there will be problems, and to be a support in that person exploring those things for themselves. And they do the same thing for the women. So, young women that are going through that process of reaching full maturity, and it's auntie that comes around. And I just think that's so beautiful, and that's something it's lost like within our modern day culture. And men are expected to be back at work within 2 weeks, women within 9 months, and where does that provide an opportunity to sort of guide and lead your children, help shape those very ancient practices that led to a very consistent, well-being outcome. It's just, it feels a bit broken. Again, like the whole thing about reimagining society and what's possible, and not just defaulting to what is considered acceptable or normal. Because you use the word progressive about your father. Well, what's progressive? It's almost the opposite. It's almost like ancient, like wisdom, isn't it? Like, and yet we say this is a new risky thing that we're trying, and it's like, well, actually, no, not really. We're not being bound by what is expected of us or what society tells us it should be. We're doing the best job we can in the moment, right?
That's right. Yeah, and I look back upon that notion of ancient man a lot in what I try to do, and I think in what we do within Well Team is try and focus on some of those things that haven't changed.
Yeah.
Cold showers aren't new.
No. Cold water immersion, cold water therapy.
If you stank, you had a shower, and pretty typically the water was not hot. So, and depending on where you lived in the world, was various degrees of cold.
Yeah. And some of the colder places, they used it very effectively. It wasn't something they hid from. It was something that they valued.
It was very much a spiritual thing to immerse yourself in those. In cold water, and the same with intermittent fasting. A lot of these things we see as modern and trendy now because somebody can package it.
Yeah.
Again, if the Kellogg's Corporation said, you know what, we've got a new cereal, it's just a box of air.
Yeah.
Probably the best thing we could do from a health perspective. It would probably significantly reduce obesity across the globe.
They're so programmed to go, this is the new trend that I need to be part of to fit in. Well,
that's it. I mean, if you trace back the whole notion of breakfast, and I'm particularly passionate about not having breakfast. I worked in a diabetes care company for 5 years, and I saw a difference, obviously, between type 1 and type 2 diabetes, but the increase in type 2 diabetes and the attribution of that to diet and lifestyle behaviours. But if you just look at wheat for breakfast, and again follow that,
the quality of what you eat for breakfast too is just it's horrible. It's always in a box. And a plastic container, and we combine the two in a very industrialized process which uses a lot of chemicals to grow and produce and to manufacture. And I'm like you, I've investigated and trialed different methods of fasting. I think I got up to 3.5 days at one point, which for me felt really incredible given what I'd consider somewhat of an addiction to food back then. And I've witnessed and felt some of those benefits, and then seen people do much longer than that. And then when I often, it's much easier to miss the breakfast than it is to meet other meals. I've always had this attachment to my dinner being my reward for the day. And Ayurvedic medicine, for example, teaches, well, actually the dinner is the smallest.
Lunch should be the
breakfast is meaningful. Lunch is, that's where your real digestive fire is. And then dinner should be quite modest because, your body doesn't have that same. And when we say about digestive fire, we think, that's a bit woo-woo or something. And yet when you look at it, it's like, well, your stomach secretes more gastric acids, there's more enzymes present. There's basically it just means everything's working. It's primed for that time of day. So that's been a real challenge for me. I found when I did some fasting, the breakfast to be easy to skip. And yet I've actually probably found more value in just what I ate and how I ate at that time, and then trying to pull back at the other end of the day. And I did find some stuff. I don't know if you've come across it on time-restricted feeding patterns. So
the food window stuff.
Yeah, and so they talk about actually not avoiding the breakfast because and sort of a bit more down the Ayurvedic path. But I think there's a role for everyone. Even in Ayurveda, there's different doshas, there's different body types, and therefore some people that suits really well, some people that's not a great idea. And it's acknowledging the individuality around that. But that the principle is worth exploring.
Yeah, and I think we just have to again, have a good bullshit filter.
Yeah.
Because and just an understanding that because something exists, because of breakfast cereal, and because everyone has in their word, I'm sure listening to this, that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. It is not the most important meal of the day. And in fact, the Pintu P9 didn't get up in the morning and scratch around in the desert to find a pack of Wheaties and pour some milk on it.
Correct.
They went off walking and,
Yeah.
and they found some food and they ate what they found, and it was
Yeah.
probably protein
Yeah.
and maybe some nuts,
Yeah.
but not a big field of rice,
Yeah.
not a big field of wheat. And so the reason why they didn't have breakfast cereal was A, because it wasn't available, but B,
Yeah.
because they didn't even know
Yeah.
that breakfast was the most important meal of the day.
Yeah, 'cause
So
they
we
haven't been
educated them on
programmed
that.
and then led to diabetes and heart disease and
That's right. And if
premature death.
Yeah, and really fascinating to have a look into the Pin2P9 because it is a really
Yeah, I
interesting
will after
story,
this.
and just having a look at some of the images that you see of the Pin2P9 in later years, their body shapes have changed significantly from the people who walked out of the desert, and what they've had to confront in terms of society is really challenging. But I just love that interplay of going, we talk about the whole process of change over time, and people use the term evolution around, we're going to be evolving now to have thumbs that are more dexterous because we can text more regularly, but we haven't evolved much for 200,000 years. Genetically, we haven't changed much, and yet we think we're capable of going outside of what has been our evolutionary behaviour. Classic case for me, television. We go, actually, of a night time now, I'm going to watch television until midnight. Genetically, for the vast majority of our existence, when it got dark, we went to bed. Now, we did not suddenly evolve
And the darkness helps regulate our sleep cycle. It helps regulate our feeding and our hunger and our satiety. And so when you intervene on that, so I think one thing we absolutely share is you can't outsmart nature. Like, why do we keep trying to do it? Because every time we do it leads to disharmony, disease.
But the last time I looked under nocturnal animals, the human species wasn't listed. We're not nocturnal. And we think, screw that. I'm going to stay up all night. I'm going to be using my phone. I'm going to be most heavily engaged in activity during the night time. Yet for 200,000 years, that's when we slept. And yet we think we can cheat nature. And we can cheat nature by, my other great concern these days, I guess, is the ability to market well-being, and I look in the Weekend Advertiser, and there's a well-being lift out, and in that well-being lift out is just pages and pages and pages of vitamins and minerals.
And we think that is natural. We think
It's not
that is the
well-being.
solution. No, it's not. Absolutely. I've recently sort of described it differently. So you got conventional health care, which it's more about disease care than it is about healthcare, in my opinion. Then you've got alternative healthcare, which is still pretty much that. Like, it's pretty much the accepted alternative. It's the ones that you're permitted to access. They're often sold in the same places. They're sold in chemists and whatnot. And then you've got the stuff which we'd prefer you not to know because it's too readily available to you and it would intervene on our profits. And that's the real gold. And that's the stuff that, again, you go and ask, your 93-year-old neighbour, and she'll tell you what her parents gave her when they were kids and what was very effective at supporting a cold, not trying to suppress it, like trying to move it on quicker because it's a body's detox process. So that you remove all the fear and the scarcity out of it, and you understand that there's actually so much available to us, it's knowledge which has almost been lost and having to be rediscovered again. I think it's coming back to what you were saying. And
that's that bullshit filter. It's in my I spent 7 years in the pharmaceutical industry, and what I learned in that time is that research follows profit. People don't invest in the research that tells us to do something unless there's a profit in it.
There's very few true independent research projects because it costs money to do research. And so it's very easy to influence. Millions
and millions of dollars to do this sort of research. And if you think about what influences our healthcare system, and we go, I worked in Cancer Council, whose mantra was very much around evidence-based. And if you look at evidence-based in a health context, the only way you can afford the evidence is through making shitloads of money. So if you've got a couple of $100 million to spare, you can do the research. Now, who's going to do that into cold showers? Because last time I checked, Ream weren't going,
there's no return on investment.
Let's invest in some cold water shower stuff. And in terms of, Kellogg's aren't going, hey, let's invest some money to find out whether breakfast is actually the most important meal of the day because we said it was. no one's investing this money in these things. When you look at that simple stuff, and again, that's why I have this real fascination with the sort of the ancient stuff, is because that's the stuff before marketing came along. And we seem to go pretty well with it. I mean, admittedly, we died at an earlier age, but we can probably attribute longer life now to simple things like sanitation, which has had by far the largest effect upon our length of life, and also antibiotics, which have helped enable a number of younger children through to adulthood who would have died at a younger age. So, so there's a lot of stuff there that
when used appropriately, like when used within the guidelines of what is useful and not over prescribed and saturated and
But our whole healthcare system is really
as an emergency care. Like, where else are you going to go?
Of course,
chronic disease, like the outcomes aren't meeting the expectations.
I came off my mountain bike last year, got helicoptered out of a place. They thankfully found a park for the chopper on the roof of the hospital. They took me in. I had all sorts of amazing, incredible treatment there on my knee. I had a hole in the front and the bone was pretty beat up, and then walked out the next day. Crutched out the next day. And after that, I didn't need any medications at all. So absolutely, from a healthcare perspective, had that not happened, I probably would have died from that injury, from infection more so than anything else. I certainly wouldn't have been able to catch food as easily with a broken leg. So
that was mountain biking. It's funny, isn't it? Like, we say that because we wouldn't have had that back then, but we've actually introduced all of these like risk-taking behaviours, which have made it more likely we're going to need these interventions as well.
But I kind of look at that process and go, medicine and science, and having again worked in the healthcare industry, is absolutely fantastic. It's just our reliance on short-term treatments when so much of what we actually need is free. Going for a walk out in nature is free.
I was speaking to someone about this the other day, and we do some different exercise. We a lot of what we do is practical and experiential, and there's one, and people, hopefully there's not too many people judging me on this in terms of, but like it's we go barefoot on a mindfulness walk, and there's some other tools we use to frame that, to sort of talk about the physiological like changes, which again very evidence-based, but also very steeped in ancient practices around how it calms your nervous system, how it regulates breathing, how it settles down markers of anxiety and stress, and there's a lot of physiological explanations that I can go into, which are probably beyond the scope of this podcast, but it's so simple. When I catch myself being overwhelmed like that, the first thing I want to do is I want to get outside to get sun, fresh air, and to feel the ground. And if I do that, 10 minutes, and I feel my nervous system just calm down, to come back to neutral again. I'm like, that is profound. And yet, instead of doing that and prescribing that, we go take this antidepressant, take this something else to suppress, to hide, to push back the thing that, rather than understanding it and where you can easily intervene.
And that's, it comes back to that same thing, improve your bullshit filter and recognise and understand that research follows profit. So the only time that you're going to hear about something these days is if you can profit from it, which is why I love, the adaptability movement. I love the movement side of it, because in order to change and get back to the stuff that's real and the stuff that's free, you've got to create a movement. It's not going to happen. Kellogg's are not going to come out tomorrow and tell everybody not to have their friggin' breakfast cereal because it'll help to reduce. We have. Well, hopefully,
what do they say? Any publicity is good publicity, even if it's negative.
Hopefully, and there's some really interesting history stuff about that, which I won't go into. But we've just got to really get back to the fundamental stuff and to get that basic stuff right. And if people, all they take from my perspective, is that for 200,000 years we walked through the bush. and a group of people here in Australia in 1984 walked out of the desert, and they'd survived for 40,000 years quite comfortably. Well, maybe not comfortably is the right word, but they survived successfully over that period of time. And they could be standing next to us in a bus stop, and we wouldn't really be able to tell the difference. I mean, obviously, if they're Aboriginal, and so their skin colour and that would be different, but maybe. But hats off to them. These are the people, like you said before, about older people and learning from them. Well, I kind of look at people who have that sort of life experience and think, shit, these people have survived without all this crap. I mean, we should be putting them up there and going, you guys are the most amazing people
Again,
in
it
this
doesn't
country.
serve the profit though, does it? Like
That's right. They didn't buy shit. They didn't
one
buy
of the
anything.
things that when I try and bring this up in conversation with people, often the first thing is, but we used to, life expectancy was like 30 or 40 or 50 back then. It's like, have you investigated that? Have you actually taken it upon yourself to go and do some research, not just to look at the top 6 results on Google, given that Google is one of those monolithic, massive companies that have algorithms dictating what results you get, but look at some independent search engines. Go and look at some more independent sources of learning. Actually broaden your spectrum. Look at stuff that makes you really uncomfortable to consume, right? At both ends of that spectrum, so that then you can use that as context to kind of refine your position or your point of view on something. Like, I think, to me, that has been so valuable, and like I can recall listening to podcasts or reading something, and Kim's like, "Are you right? Is that you really need to be listening to that? Is that like?" I was like, "No, I have a responsibility to, because if I'm going to take a position or going to make a decision on this, then I need to understand the point of view that sits out here and the point of view that sits out here, because otherwise I don't have perspective." So uncomfortable, yes, but valuable, like unbelievable, like. So look, we could probably talk forever here, I think, and we'll probably have a good chat off camera too. How would you, let's say we've talked about a lot of stuff today. So we've gone through, I think ancient wisdom seems to be the thing that we keep coming back to, and just how simple and available well-being can be to all of us when we drop the filters and the expectation around society. Would that be a fair way to kind of...
Yeah, look, absolutely. I just can't harp on it enough. Having been in marketing and having been in sales industries and having been in the pharmaceutical industry, which is great at marketing and sales, the ability to make profit pervades our lives. Not necessarily for the better, and I would argue largely not for the better. And if we become consumer driven because of all the marketing messages, then we got no friggin' hope of being well. Because we'll always be wanting that extra thing. But you can jump in your cold shower tomorrow and you can have a hit of dopamine, which is the equivalent of a cocaine hit. Without the consequences of all the, like it's feeding you, it's nourishing you in a way that it gives you access to the useful parts of it without any of the other stuff, right?
It drives down inflammation, it increases brown fat, the good type of fat that exists in your body, which, we need fat, another thing that we've been misled on. It does all of these things for sort of vitality and focus and metabolism and your blood pressure, and like, it's incredible, right? So and this is the point in the podcast I love to get to, is so that's one of the tools we spoke about. Intermittent fasting was another one to investigate. Organisations like us, like Wellteam and the adaptability movement, like engaging with a community of people like that have some experience in this can lead you through an experience or a journey to find your own way with this. I think these are practical takeaways that people can use and help to sort of, whether you're just starting on this path or whether you've been on it for a long time and haven't quite found the way for you yet, there's opportunities out there to, jump on this podcast, those types of things. Go and check out your website. One of the great things that you guys do at Wellteam is you run these challenges, like generally an 8-week type of challenge. And there's a different theme to each one. Like there's, and I did see there's an ancient wisdom
Ancient Man Challenge.
Yeah, which I love. I did inquire about it and I haven't made any progress on signing up, I'm sorry. But look, I'd encourage other people to go and check that out. I know you're on LinkedIn, but where else can people find you?
Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Strava, Twitter somewhere.
Yeah, cool. And the website is wellteam.me.
Correct.
Yeah, fantastic. So that's probably the best place to go because you go direct to source. You're not having to go through all those filtered algorithms. And then from there, you'd be able to find all the links to everything else as well, right?
And what I encourage people to do, what we've invested 2 years into with Wellteam was what's called a scorecard tool, which
yeah, it's fantastic. I've done it myself.
Well, thank you. I think it's a really great way for people to get a sense of all of the things that they could be doing around well-being.
Yeah.
And there's not one on there that we say, have you had a vitamin D supplementation? There's
another conversation to go deep on.
Everything in there is actionable by everybody today.
Yeah.
And we really want to get that message across.
Yeah.
And as you said, the Ancient Man Challenge, it's a 6-week challenge and it's all completely accessible information. Yeah. And it really taps into that, what have we been doing? Yeah. And what do we need to be re-challenged with?
Yeah. And now these walks, we've talked about those a couple of times I've been on. Is there kind of like a come and try scenario? Like if you see it, if you start following you on LinkedIn or social media or something, is it this type of thing you can kind of turn up to and see who's around and see how it works for you? Yeah?
Yeah.
Great,
I mean,
cool.
Head to Wellteam website, there's an events page there and you'll find all the information there. Yeah. We do ask people to join the walk on the events page, and that asks you to fill stuff out and you know, I hate it, but the whole terms and conditions stuff.
But you're not sharing it with third-party providers. You're not selling it.
Oh no. And really clear with us, the intention of Wellteam is to grow it like a not-for-profit, but we're using a for-profit model. Yeah. And the reason to do that is because not-for-profits and charities can't compete with Kellogg's.
Yeah.
So here we go again. From our perspective, to actually grow. To grow a revolution around men's well-being and to make having cold showers, to make spending time in nature, to make intermittent fasting, to make going to bed at a consistent time, to make putting your family first, to make these things something that we take on and go, that's life, that's what it is to be a modern man.
Sure.
We have to play the same game as these other organisations are playing to tell us that to be a modern man, you've got to own this car, you've got to have that house, you've got to have a fucking Rolex watch on your wrist. You know, this bullshit. You know, we've got to play the same game. We've got to play it back.
Yeah, cool. So,
sorry.
No, all good. Wellteam.me, you can head there. If you want to find more out about us, head to the adaptabilitymovement.world. We've also got a free ebook, so it's called How to Go from Surviving to Thriving, so you can go and download that as well. And by all means, please, if you enjoyed today's episode, check out Troy's stuff, check out ours, and share it, please. Like that organic sort of message of word of mouth is the most valuable thing and the thing that we appreciate most. So thanks, Troy. Appreciate it, mate.
Thank you, sir, and thanks for listening.